Tonight, we embark on a new, gentle journey through a tale of magic, adventure, Jumanji. This is not a story of thrills and chills, but rather a peaceful walk through a world where games can change everything, where childhood fears must be faced, and where the line between fantasy and reality becomes beautifully blurred. But before that, my name's Murphy, and I'd love to know where you're listening from, and what time of day it is for you. If this brings you calm, don't forget to subscribe. There are so many more peaceful nights ahead. Our story begins in the year 1869, in the small town of Brantford, New Hampshire. The air is crisp with the promise of winter, and the ground beneath bare oak trees crunches with fallen leaves that have turned golden and brown. The town itself feels like something from a painting. White houses with black shutters, church steeples reaching toward grey November skies, and the distant sound of horse-drawn carriages moving along cobblestone streets. Two young boys run through the woods that surround the town. Their breath creates small clouds in the cold air as they carry something between them. A wooden box that seems to pulse with its own strange energy. The boys' faces are tight with worry, their eyes darting nervously toward the shadows between the trees. They've been running for what feels like hours, and now they've found what they were looking for. A clearing where the moonlight falls in silver patches across the forest floor. The box they carry is unlike anything you might expect to find in a child's playroom. It's made of dark wood that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it, and its surface is covered with intricate carvings that seem to shift and move when you're not looking directly at them. Strange symbols dance across its edges, and if you listen carefully, you might hear the faint sound of drums beating from somewhere deep within. The boys dig frantically, their hands working the cold earth until they've created a hole deep enough to hold their burden. They place the box carefully into the ground, and as they do, they whisper words that sound like both a prayer and a warning. The earth falls back over the box with soft, muffled sounds, and within moments, there's no sign that anything unusual has ever been buried here. As the boys walk away, the forest settles back into its natural quiet. But something has changed. The very air seems to hold its breath, waiting for the day when someone else will find what has been hidden here. The drums that beat within the buried box grow fainter and fainter until they're just a whisper in the wind that moves through the trees. Time moves forward, like a gentle river, carrying us to 1969. The same town of Brantford still nestles among the New Hampshire hills, but now it wears the colors of a different era. The leaves are once again golden and red, and the air carries the scent of wood smoke from chimneys and the distant aroma of someone's dinner cooking. Alan Parrish is 12 years old, with dark hair that never quite stays where it's supposed to, and eyes that hold both mischief and vulnerability. He's the kind of boy who finds adventure in ordinary places and sees magic in things that adults have forgotten how to notice. Right now, he's walking through the construction site where a new factory is being built. His father's factory, actually, because Sam Parrish is an important man in this small town. The construction site is a maze of half-built walls and scattered building materials. Workers have gone home for the day, leaving behind the smell of fresh concrete and the echo of hammers that rang out just hours before. Alan walks carefully among the debris, his sneakers making soft scuffing sounds on the dusty ground. He's not really looking for anything in particular when he sees it, a glint of something dark and wooden sticking up from the earth. The soil here has been disturbed by the construction, and rain has washed away some of the dirt that had kept the box hidden for exactly 100 years. Alan kneels down and begins to dig with his hands, his fingers working carefully around the edges of what he's found. When he lifts the box from the ground, it feels heavier than it should, as if it contains more than just wood and whatever game pieces might be inside. The carvings on its surface are even more detailed than they appeared to be a century ago, and when Alan runs his fingers over them, they feel warm despite the cool October air. There's something magnetic about the box, something that makes Alan want to open it immediately. But he's also a careful boy, one who understands that some things are better examined in the safety of home. So he tucks the box under his arm and begins the walk back to the White House where his family lives, where his mother is probably starting to worry about him being out so late. The Parrish house stands on a quiet street lined with maple trees, their branches now mostly bare, except for a few stubborn leaves that refuse to fall. Inside, the house is warm and comfortable, filled with the soft yellow light of table lamps and the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Alan's room is on the second floor, a boy's sanctuary filled with model airplanes, baseball cards, and books about far-off places. Alan sits on his bed with the mysterious box in front of him. He studied every inch of its surface, tracing the carved symbols with his finger and wondering what language they might represent. The box has a clasp, but it's not locked. It simply waits, as if it's been waiting for exactly this moment, for exactly this boy, for exactly this evening, when curiosity would overcome caution. When Alan opens the box, the first thing he notices is the game board inside. It's unlike any board game he's ever seen. The surface appears to be made of stone or some material that looks ancient, and it's covered with a path that winds around the edges and spirals towards the center. The path is marked with spaces, each one decorated with symbols that seem to shift and change when he's not looking directly at them. The game pieces are carved from what looks like ivory or bone, and they're shaped like small animals: a lion, an elephant, a rhino, a crocodile. When Alan picks up one of the pieces, it feels warm in his palm, and he could swear he hears the faint sound of drums beating somewhere far away. In the center of the board, there's a small crystal dome, and inside the dome, something is moving. It looks like a tiny jungle, complete with miniature trees and vines, and if Alan looks very carefully, he can see small animals moving through the underbrush. The whole scene pulses with a soft, green light that makes his eyes feel heavy and dreamy. Alan reads the name of the game carved into the edge of the board. Jumanji. It's a word he's never heard before, but somehow it feels familiar, as if it's been waiting in his vocabulary all his life. Below the name, there are instructions written in elegant script that seems to glow faintly in the lamplight of his room. The rules are simple enough. Players take turns rolling dice and moving their pieces around the board. But as Alan reads further, he realizes that this isn't just any game. The instructions speak of adventures that become real, of challenges that must be faced with courage, and of the importance of finishing what you start. There's a warning, too, written in letters that seem to pulse with their own inner light. A game for those who seek to find a way to leave their world behind. Do not begin unless you intend to finish. Downstairs, the doorbell rings with a sound that echoes through the quiet house, and he can hear footsteps on the stairs. A moment later, Sarah Whittle appears in his doorway, her blonde hair caught in a ponytail, and her cheeks pink from the cool evening air. Sarah is in Alan's class at school, a girl with bright eyes and a quick smile who's always been kind to him even when other kids weren't. She's curious about everything, the type of person who asks questions that adults sometimes find uncomfortable and who notices things that others miss. Tonight, she's stopped by to return a book she borrowed from Alan's collection. When Sarah sees the game spread out on Alan's bed, her eyes widen with interest. She's immediately drawn to the beautiful board, the mysterious pieces, and the strange symbols that seem to dance in the lamplight. Alan explains how he found the box, and Sarah listens with the intense attention of someone who understands that she's witnessing something extraordinary. The two children sit together on the bed, studying the game board and trying to understand what they've discovered. Sarah runs her fingers over the carved symbols, and she gasps softly when she realizes they're not just decorations. They're actually moving, shifting, and changing position like living things. The crystal dome in the center pulses with its gentle green light, and both children find themselves leaning closer, drawn by the miniature jungle that seems to beckon them forward. Alan suggests they try playing the game, just to see what happens. Sarah is a little nervous. There's something about the game that feels different from other games, something that makes her think of deep, dark forests and ancient mysteries. But she's also curious, and curiosity has always been stronger than fear in her young heart. They decide to each choose a piece. Alan selects the lion, feeling drawn to its proud stance and noble bearing. Sarah chooses the elephant, attracted to its gentle wisdom and quiet strength. As they place their pieces on the starting position, the board seems to hum with anticipation, and the sound of distant drums grows just a little bit louder. The first roll of the dice comes up as a 5, and Alan moves his lion piece accordingly. As soon as the piece settles into its new position, words begin to appear on the game board. Glowing letters that seem to write themselves across the stone surface. The message is like a riddle, speaking of a place where time stands still and jungle rules apply. But before Alan can fully process what he's reading, something extraordinary begins to happen. The room around him starts to shimmer and blur, as if he's looking at it through water. The familiar walls of his bedroom seem to grow distant and insubstantial, while the green light from the game board grows brighter and more intense. Sarah watches in amazement and growing alarm as Alan begins to fade, becoming translucent like a ghost in an old movie. She reaches out to touch him, but her hand passes through his shoulder as if he's made of mist. Alan's eyes are wide with wonder and terror as he realizes what's happening to him, but he can't seem to move or speak or do anything to stop the transformation. The sound of drums grows louder, more insistent, and now Sarah can hear other sounds too. The calls of exotic birds, the rustle of large animals moving through thick vegetation, the distant roar of a waterfall. It's as if the jungle from inside the crystal dome is expanding, growing, becoming real and large enough to swallow a 12-year-old boy. Alan looks at Sarah one last time, his mouth forming words she can't hear, and then he's gone. The room snaps back to normal reality with an almost audible pop, leaving Sarah alone with the game board and the echo of drums that gradually fades to silence. Where Alan's piece had been, there's now a small, clear dome, and inside it, Sarah can see a tiny figure that looks exactly like her friend. The miniature Alan is standing in what appears to be a jungle clearing, looking around with the same expression of wonder and fear that she saw on the real Alan's face just moments before. Sarah stares at the game board in shock her hands trembling as she tries to understand what she's just witnessed. The words that appeared when Alan moved his piece are still glowing faintly on the board, and now she can read them clearly. In the jungle you must wait, until the dice read 5 or 8. The front door of the parish house slams shut with a sound that echoes through the quiet neighborhood. Sarah runs down the front steps and along the sidewalk, her heart pounding with fear and confusion. She doesn't stop running until she reaches her own house, several blocks away, where she bursts through the door and into her parents' arms, sobbing about games and jungles and friends who disappear into thin air. Her parents, like most adults, assume that Sarah has had a nightmare or perhaps played some kind of elaborate game of pretend that got out of hand. They comfort her as best they can, but they don't really believe her story about a magical game that can make children vanish. How could they? Such things don't exist in the rational world of grown-ups. Back in Alan's room, the game board sits abandoned on his bed, waiting. The house grows quiet as Alan's parents call for him, search for him, and finally contact the police when they realize their son has truly disappeared. The search continues for days, then weeks, but no trace of Alan Parrish is ever found. The official conclusion is that he ran away from home, though no one can explain why a happy, well-adjusted boy would do such a thing. The game board remains where Alan left it, gathering dust as the months pass. Mrs. Parrish can't bear to go into her son's room, and Mr. Parrish finds it too painful to disturb anything that might hold memories of his missing boy. The Jumanji game sits in the growing darkness of the unused room, its crystal dome still glowing faintly with green light, still holding the tiny figure of Alan Parrish in its miniature jungle. As Sarah grows older, she begins to doubt her own memories of that night. Adults are very good at convincing children that impossible things are just imagination, and eventually Sarah starts to believe that perhaps she really did dream the whole thing. The details become hazy, the emotions less sharp, until the night Alan disappeared becomes just another childhood memory that doesn't quite make sense. The years pass like pages turning in a book. The 1970s arrive with their own fashions and music and ways of looking at the world. The parish house stands empty now. Alan's parents moved away not long after their son's disappearance, unable to bear living in a place filled with such painful memories. The house changes hands several times, but it never seems to hold families for very long. People move in with great hopes and plans, but something about the place makes them uneasy, as if the very walls remember the boy who vanished and continue to wait for his return. Sarah Whittle grows up and moves away from Brantford, pursuing her own life and trying to forget the strange events of her childhood. She becomes a successful woman, but she's never quite able to shake the feeling that something important was left unfinished, some promise left unfulfilled. Sometimes, in her dreams, she hears the sound of distant drums. The game board remains in Alan's room, now covered with a thin layer of dust and spiderwebs. The house's new owners occasionally venture into the room, but they never stay long. There's something about the atmosphere that makes people uncomfortable, a sense of waiting that seems to seep from the very walls. Most of the time, the room is simply closed off and forgotten. But the game itself doesn't forget. It continues to wait with the patience of something that has already waited for centuries and can wait for centuries more. The tiny figure of Alan Parrish remains trapped in the crystal dome, and if you knew how to look, you might see him sometimes, still moving through his miniature jungle, still waiting for someone to roll the dice that will set him free. The calendar pages have turned to 1995, and the old parish house has found new occupants. Judy and Peter Shepherd are children who have recently moved to Brantford with their aunt, a kind woman named Nora, who has taken them in after their parents died in a skiing accident. The house feels enormous to them, full of unfamiliar shadows and creaking sounds that seem to whisper stories of the past. Judy is the older of the two siblings, about 12 years old, with dark hair and serious eyes that have seen too much sadness for someone her age. She's protective of her younger brother and has taken on responsibilities that should belong to adults. Peter is around 8, a boy who hasn't spoken since his parents' death, who communicates through gestures and expressions, and who finds comfort in the simple act of being close to his sister. The moving process has been overwhelming for both children. Boxes are stacked everywhere, filled with possessions that belong to their former life, a life that seems very far away now. Aunt Nora has been patient and understanding, giving them space to explore their new home and adjust to their changed circumstances at their own pace. It's during one of these explorations that Judy and Peter venture into the room on the second floor that has been closed off for so long. The door opens with a creak that echoes through the house, and dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight that filters through dirty windows. The room is filled with remnants of its former occupant. Model airplanes still hang from the ceiling, and posters of baseball players still decorate the walls. Peter is immediately drawn to the toys and games that remain scattered around the room. He's always been fascinated by mechanical things, and his eyes light up when he sees the old model trains and building sets. Judy follows him into the room, her practical mind already thinking about how they might clean it up and make it useful again. It's Peter who finds the game board, still sitting where Alan left it 26 years ago. The Jumanji game has waited patiently through all those years, and now it seems to pulse with renewed energy as young hands touch it once again. Peter's eyes widen as he examines the beautiful carved surface, and he tugs on Judy's sleeve to get her attention. When Judy sees the game, she's immediately struck by its unusual appearance. It's unlike any board game she's ever encountered, more like a work of art than a toy. The stone surface is covered with intricate carvings that seem to shift and move in the changing light, and the crystal dome in the center glows with a soft, hypnotic luminescence that makes her feel sleepy and alert at the same time. The two children carry the game board downstairs to the living room, where the afternoon light is better and they can examine their discovery more carefully. Peter sets up the game on the coffee table while Judy reads the instructions aloud, her voice soft and wondering as she tries to understand the strange rules and warnings carved into the board's surface. The game pieces are still where Alan and Sarah left them all those years ago. Alan's lion piece sits in the position where he made his last move, and Sarah's elephant piece remains at the starting point, waiting for someone to continue the game that was never finished. Judy and Peter don't know the history of these pieces, but they can sense that something important has happened here before. Peter is eager to start playing, but Judy is more cautious. There's something about the game that makes her uncomfortable, a feeling that they're about to step into something much larger and more dangerous than they realize. But Peter's enthusiasm is infectious, and eventually her curiosity overcomes her caution. They decide to move the existing pieces rather than start a new game. Judy picks up the elephant piece that had been Sarah's, while Peter takes hold of the lion that had belonged to Alan. As soon as their fingers touch the carved figures, the game board begins to glow more brightly, and the sound of distant drums starts to echo through the house. Judy rolls the dice first, and they come up as a 3. As she moves the elephant piece, words begin to appear on the game board. Glowing letters that seem to write themselves across the stone surface. The message speaks of creatures that belong in distant lands, of roars that shake the very foundations of buildings, and of courage that must be found in the face of the impossible. But before Judy can fully process what she's reading, they hear it, a sound that doesn't belong in a quiet house in New Hampshire. It's the deep, rumbling roar of a lion coming from somewhere upstairs. The sound is so loud and so close that it seems to shake the windows in their frames, and both children freeze, their hearts pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. The roaring continues, growing louder and more insistent. And now they can hear other sounds too. The heavy padding of large paws on wooden floors, the creak of floorboards under enormous weight, and the occasional scrape of claws against furniture. Peter looks at Judy with wide eyes, and she can see her own amazement and fear reflected in his expression. Moving very quietly, they creep towards the stairs, drawn by curiosity, despite their growing alarm. The house seems different now, charged with an energy that makes the air itself feel thick and electric. Every shadow looks deeper, every sound seems amplified, and the very walls seem to pulse with the rhythm of the drums that continue to beat somewhere in the distance. As they reach the top of the stairs, they can see into the hallway, and what they see takes their breath away. There, pacing back and forth in front of the bathroom door, is a full-grown African lion. Its golden mane catches the light filtering through the hallway windows, and its muscles ripple beneath its tawny coat as it moves with the fluid grace of a natural predator. The lion doesn't seem aggressive, exactly, but it's clearly agitated, confused by its surroundings. It sniffs at the air, trying to understand how it came to be in this strange place of walls and furniture instead of the wide savannas where it belongs. Every few moments, it throws back its magnificent head and releases another roar that echoes through the house like thunder. Judy and Peter watch in fascination and terror, pressed against the wall at the top of the stairs. They both understand, with the clarity that sometimes comes to children in impossible situations, that the lion is here because of the game. Somehow, rolling the dice and moving the pieces has brought this magnificent creature into their world, and now they must figure out what to do about it. The lion continues to pace, its large paws making soft thuds on the hardwood floor. It seems to be searching for something, or perhaps waiting for something, and there's an intelligence in its golden eyes that suggests it understands more about its situation than a wild animal should. Sometimes it looks towards the stairs, where the children are hiding, and they hold their breath, wondering if it can sense their presence. Back in the living room, the game board continues to glow with its mysterious light, and the drums continue to beat their ancient rhythm. Judy and Peter huddle together on the couch, trying to understand what they've gotten themselves into. The lion upstairs has grown quieter, but they can still hear it occasionally. Peter points to the game board and makes gestures that Judy has learned to interpret. He's noticed that there are already 2 pieces on the board, and he's wondering if they should continue playing rather than starting over. Judy studies the board more carefully and realizes that the game has been interrupted, not finished. The lion piece sits in a position that suggests someone else was playing before them, and the elephant piece waits at the starting point. Looking more closely at the lion piece, Judy gasps. Inside the carved figure, she can see something that shouldn't be there. a tiny person, no bigger than her thumb, standing in what appears to be a miniature jungle. The figure is too small to make out clearly, but it looks like a man with a beard, wearing clothes that seem to be made of animal skins. Peter rolls the dice, and they come up as a 5. As he moves the lion piece, the game board erupts with light, and the drums suddenly become loud enough to shake the entire house. The crystal dome in the center of the board begins to spin, and the miniature jungle inside it grows larger and more detailed, as if it's expanding to accommodate something new. The air in the living room begins to shimmer, just as it did in Alan's bedroom 26 years ago. But this time, instead of someone disappearing, someone is appearing. The shimmer grows brighter and more intense, and suddenly, with a sound like thunder, a full-grown man crashes through the coffee table and lands on the living room floor, covered in vines and wearing clothes made of animal skins. The man is tall and lean, with wild hair and a beard that hasn't been trimmed in years. His skin is tanned dark by tropical sun, and his eyes hold the alertness of someone who has spent decades watching for danger. He looks around the room in confusion, blinking in the electric light, and then his gaze falls on the 2 children who are staring at him in amazement. This is Alan Parrish, no longer a 12-year-old boy, but a grown man of 38, returned from the jungle where he has spent the last 26 years of his life. He looks at Judy and Peter with wonder and gratitude, and his first words are barely above a whisper. What year is it? The revelation that 26 years have passed hits Alan like a physical blow. He sits on the floor among the pieces of the broken coffee table, his hands shaking as he tries to process what has happened to him. To him, it feels like he's been in the jungle for a very long time, but time moves differently there, and he's never been sure exactly how long he's been gone. Judy and Peter watch him with a mixture of sympathy and fascination. They can see the pain in his eyes as he realizes that his entire childhood, his adolescence, and his early adulthood have been stolen from him. His parents, who were middle-aged when he disappeared, are now either very old or dead. The world he knew has moved on without him, and he's been left behind in a place where time stands still. Alan asks about his parents, his voice barely steady. Judy has to tell him that the house has been empty for years, that his family moved away long ago. She doesn't know what happened to them, but she can see that the news devastates him. He spent all these years dreaming of the day he would return home, and now he discovers that home no longer exists. But there's no time for extended grieving, because the game is still in progress, and they can all hear the lion upstairs beginning to roar again. Alan explains to the children that the game cannot be stopped once it's been started. The only way to end it is to finish it, and that means all the players must continue taking turns until someone reaches the center of the board. The drums continue to beat their insistent rhythm, and now they can hear other sounds too. The calls of exotic birds, the rustle of large animals moving through vegetation, and the distant crash of falling trees. The jungle is beginning to bleed through into the real world, and if they don't finish the game soon, the boundary between the 2 worlds will disappear entirely. Alan looks at the game board with an expression of grim determination. He's survived 26 years in the jungle, facing dangers that would terrify most people, but he's never stopped hoping that someday he would be able to return to finish what he started. Now that day has come, and he's not going to let fear stop him from ending the nightmare that has defined his life. Alan explains to Judy and Peter that they need to find Sarah Whittle, the girl who was playing the game with him when he disappeared. According to the rules of Jumanji, all the original players must be present to finish the game properly. Without Sarah, they cannot reach the end, and the supernatural chaos that has already begun will only get worse. The search for Sarah proves to be more challenging than expected. Alan discovers that she no longer lives in Brantford, and tracking her down requires several phone calls and a visit to the town records office. During their search, they learn that Sarah has become a successful psychotherapist, but she's never married and has no children. She's built a life for herself, but it's a life that seems somehow incomplete, as if she's been waiting for something without knowing what it is. When they finally locate Sarah, she's living in a town about an hour away, in a neat apartment that's filled with books and plants, but somehow feels sterile and lonely. Alan calls her on the phone, and even though his voice has deepened and aged, she recognizes it immediately. The sound of his voice brings back all the memories she's tried to suppress, all the dreams about drums and jungles and games that change reality. Sarah's first reaction is disbelief, then anger. She spent decades trying to forget that night, trying to convince herself that it was all a childhood nightmare. The idea that Alan is alive, that he's been trapped in a game all these years, forces her to confront the fact that her memories were real, that the impossible thing she witnessed actually happened. But as Alan explains what's happening, as he describes the game pieces and the lion that's currently prowling through the house, Sarah begins to understand that she has no choice. The game has been restarted, and whether she wants to or not, she's part of it. The only way to end it is to finish it, and that means facing the fears that have haunted her for 26 years. The phone call ends with Sarah agreeing to come to Brantford, though her voice is shaky and uncertain. She tells Alan that she'll be there within the hour, and then she hangs up and stares at the phone for a long time, wondering if she has the courage to face what's waiting for her. Sarah arrives at the house. She's a woman in her late 30s now, with blonde hair that's been cut short and professional clothes that speak of success and independence. But her eyes hold the same intelligence and curiosity that Alan remembered from their childhood, and when she sees him, she can't help but smile despite her fear. The reunion is emotional, but brief. The lion upstairs has been joined by other sounds, the chatter of monkeys, the screech of exotic birds, and the heavy breathing of large animals that seem to be moving through the upper floors of the house. The boundary between the game world and the real world is breaking down, and they don't have time for extended explanations or emotional processing. Sarah looks at the game board with the same mixture of fascination and terror that she felt as a child. The symbols still dance and shift across its surface, and the crystal dome still glows with its hypnotic light. But now she understands what she couldn't understand then, that this is not just a game, but a doorway between worlds, a bridge between the possible and the impossible. Alan explains the situation to Sarah while Judy and Peter listen intently. The game has been partially played, but it must be finished by the original players. Each time someone rolls the dice and moves a piece, something new emerges from the jungle world into the real world. The only way to stop the chaos is to reach the center of the board, where the game ends and everything returns to normal. Sarah looks around the room at the three people who will be depending on her courage. Alan, who has already sacrificed 26 years of his life to this game. Judy and Peter, who are just children, but who have already shown remarkable bravery in the face of the impossible. She realizes that whatever fears she has, whatever reluctance she feels, she cannot abandon them to face this alone. The four of them gather around the game board, and Sarah places her hand on the elephant piece that she abandoned so long ago. The game seems to respond to her touch, glowing brighter and pulsing with renewed energy. The drums beat louder, and somewhere in the distance, they can hear the sound of the jungle calling them forward. As the game continues, the supernatural chaos that began in the house starts to spread throughout the town of Brantford. The quiet New England streets that have known nothing more exciting than the occasional lost dog suddenly become pathways for creatures that belong in the wildest corners of the world. The boundary between the game world and reality has become so thin that animals are simply walking through it as if it were an open door. A herd of zebras gallops down Main Street, their hooves clattering on the asphalt, while confused drivers pull over to the side of the road and stare in amazement. The zebras move with the fluid grace of creatures that have never known anything but open grasslands, and they seem as surprised by their surroundings as the townspeople are by their presence. Behind the zebras come a family of rhinoceros, their massive bodies moving with surprising speed and agility. They lumber down the sidewalks, occasionally stopping to investigate a storefront or a parked car, their small eyes curious about these strange human artifacts. One of them becomes fascinated by its own reflection in a shop window and spends several minutes studying this other rhinoceros that seems to be staring back at it. The sky above the town fills with exotic birds that have never been seen in New Hampshire. Brightly colored parrots wheel and dive through the air, their cries adding to the growing symphony of jungle sounds that echo through the streets. A flock of flamingos settles on the town pond, their pink feathers creating a splash of tropical color against the gray October sky. People emerge from their houses and businesses to witness this impossible parade. Some reach for cameras, trying to capture proof of what they're seeing, while others simply stand and stare, their minds struggling to process the reality of elephants walking past the post office and monkeys swinging from the streetlights. The animals don't seem aggressive or threatening. They're simply confused, trying to navigate a world that makes no sense to them. But their presence creates a kind of gentle chaos, a disruption of the normal order that makes everyone in town feel like they've stepped into a dream or a fairy tale. While the animals spread through the town, the house where the game is being played undergoes its own transformation. Vines begin to push through the walls, growing with impossible speed and covering the furniture with thick, green tendrils. The floorboards crack and split as roots force their way up from below, and flowers bloom in corners where flowers have never grown before. The air inside the house becomes thick and humid, like the air in a greenhouse or a tropical rainforest. Moss begins to cover the walls, and ferns unfurl in the corners, their fronds reaching towards the ceiling. The familiar domestic space of the living room gradually disappears beneath a canopy of jungle vegetation. Judy and Peter watch in fascination as their new home transforms around them. Orchids bloom on what used to be the mantelpiece, their exotic petals glowing in the strange light that now fills the room. Vines hang from the ceiling like natural curtains, and the sound of dripping water creates a gentle rhythm that counterpoints the ever-present drums. Alan moves through this transformed environment with the ease of someone who has spent decades in similar surroundings. He points out which plants are safe to touch and which ones should be avoided, sharing knowledge that he never wanted to acquire, but that might now save their lives. He shows them how to move through the thick vegetation without getting tangled in the vines, and how to recognize the difference between harmless flowers and those that might be dangerous. Sarah struggles more with the changed environment. Her professional clothes catch on thorns and branches, and she's not used to the humid air that makes every breath feel heavy. But she adapts quickly, drawing on reserves of strength that she didn't know she possessed. The years of therapy work have taught her how to remain calm in difficult situations, and she uses those skills now as she navigates through what was once a normal living room. The game board sits in the center of this jungle transformation, still glowing with its mysterious light. Somehow, the vegetation seems to respect its presence, growing around it, but never covering it. The crystal dome pulses with increasing intensity, and the drums beat louder and more insistently, as if urging the players to continue their game despite the chaos that surrounds them. As the game progresses, a new and more dangerous element enters the story. Alan's dice rolls and reveals a message about a hunter, and suddenly the air fills with the sound of a rifle being cocked. Through the jungle vegetation that now fills the house, they can see a figure moving with the purposeful stride of someone who knows exactly what he's hunting. Van Pelt is a man from another era, dressed in the khaki and leather of a colonial big-game hunter. His face is weathered by years under harsh suns, and his eyes hold the cold determination of someone who has never failed to bring down his prey. He carries a rifle that looks like it could stop an elephant, and every movement he makes speaks of confidence and deadly skill. But Van Pelt is not hunting elephants or lions. He's hunting Alan Parrish, and he's been hunting him for 26 years. In the jungle world where Alan has been trapped, Van Pelt has been a constant threat. Now that Alan has returned to the real world, Van Pelt has followed him, bringing his single-minded pursuit into the streets of Brantford. The hunter moves through the transformed house with the same ease that Alan shows. But his intentions are far more sinister. He examines the vines and flowers with the practiced eye of someone who has spent his life tracking prey through difficult terrain. He can read the signs that Alan has left behind, a broken branch here, a footprint there, the lingering scent of fear and desperation. Alan explains to the others that Van Pelt is not just a man, but a manifestation of the game itself, a challenge that must be faced and overcome. The hunter represents all the fears that have plagued Alan during his years in the jungle. The fear of being caught, the fear of never escaping, the fear of dying alone and forgotten. Sarah, Judy, and Peter watch through the thick vegetation as Van Pelt moves through the house, his rifle ready, his eyes scanning every shadow. They can see that he's not just hunting Alan's body, but his spirit, trying to break the determination that has kept Alan alive for so many years. This is a battle that goes beyond the physical, a confrontation between hope and despair that will determine whether any of them will survive to see the game's end. They try to keep playing. Despite the danger posed by Van Pelt and the chaos that surrounds them, the four players understand that their only hope lies in continuing the game. Each turn brings new challenges, but it also brings them closer to the center of the board, where the game will end, and everything will return to normal. They take turns rolling the dice, moving their pieces, and facing whatever emerges from the jungle world. Sometimes it's animals, a family of monkeys that swing through the chandelier, a crocodile that emerges from what used to be the kitchen sink, a flock of tropical birds that fill the air with their colorful wings and exotic calls. Sometimes the challenges are more subtle. Quicksand that appears in the middle of the hallway, vines that seem to have minds of their own and try to wrap around the player's ankles, or fruits that look delicious but might be poisonous. Each challenge tests their courage, their intelligence, and their ability to work together as a team. Alan's experience in the jungle proves invaluable. He knows how to avoid the dangerous plants, and how to find safe paths through terrain that seems impassable. But he also knows that the game is getting more dangerous with each turn, that the challenges will become more severe as they approach the center of the board. Sarah discovers strengths she didn't know she possessed. Her years of helping people work through their psychological problems have taught her how to remain calm under pressure, and how to think clearly when others are panicking. She becomes the voice of reason, the one who reminds the others to focus on the game, even when the chaos around them seems overwhelming. Judy and Peter prove to be remarkably resilient. They support each other through moments of fear and doubt, and their presence reminds Alan and Sarah that they're not just playing for themselves, but for the future of these innocent children. As the effects of the game spread further through Brantford, the town descends into a state of controlled chaos. The local police force, trained to handle nothing more serious than traffic violations and the occasional domestic disturbance, find themselves trying to manage a situation that defies all logic and understanding. The mayor calls the state police, who call the National Guard, none of whom have any idea how to handle a town that has been invaded by every animal in the zoo, and several that don't exist in any zoo. The townspeople react with a mixture of wonder and terror. Children point and laugh at the monkeys swinging from the streetlights, while their parents worry about safety and property damage. Shop owners board up their windows, not because the animals are aggressive, but because a curious rhinoceros could cause a lot of damage simply by investigating a storefront. The local news station attempts to cover the story, but their reports sound so incredible that the network executives assume it's some kind of elaborate hoax. The footage of flamingos walking down Main Street and lions sunning themselves on the steps of the library is dismissed as special effects, too fantastic to be real. Meanwhile, the weather begins to change. The air grows warmer and more humid, and tropical plants begin to sprout in the town park. The neat, orderly landscape of New England starts to transform into something that looks more like a South American rainforest. Palm trees push up through the asphalt, and orchids bloom in places where only dandelions grew before. The transformation is beautiful in its own way, but it's also terrifying because it represents the complete breakdown of the natural order. The boundaries between different worlds are dissolving, and no one knows how to restore them. The only hope lies with 4 people playing a game in a house that has become a jungle, but most of the townspeople don't even know they exist. As the players approach the center of the board, the challenges become more intense and more personal. The game seems to sense that it's nearing its end, and it responds by unleashing its most difficult tests. Each roll of the dice brings dangers that threaten not just the player's safety, but their sanity and their will to continue. Van Pelt's pursuit becomes more relentless. He sets traps throughout the transformed house, using his knowledge of jungle warfare to create hazards that would challenge even the most experienced survivor. He leaves false trails to confuse Alan, and he uses the calls of birds and animals to mask his own movements. The hunter has become a psychological presence as much as a physical one, a reminder that some pursuits never end. the other challenges become more complex as well. Quicksand appears in rooms where they least expect it, and vines grow with such speed that they can trap a person in seconds. The animals that emerge from the game become larger and more unpredictable. A massive python that coils around the staircase, a family of gorillas that claim the upper floor as their territory, and swarms of insects that cloud the air with their buzzing wings. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the game at this stage is the way it begins to test the relationships between the players. The stress and fear create tensions that threaten to tear the group apart. Old fears and insecurities rise to the surface, and the players must confront not just the external dangers, but their own internal demons. Alan struggles with guilt over the years he's lost, and the pain he's caused others. Sarah battles with the anger and fear that have shaped her adult life. Judy and Peter face the reality that they might not survive to see their aunt again, that they might join the long list of people who have been lost to circumstances beyond their control. The game feeds on these fears, using them to create challenges that are perfectly tailored to each player's weaknesses. It's as if the game can see into their hearts and minds, understanding exactly what will hurt them most and what will test their resolve most severely. As the game board glows brighter, the players realize that they are approaching the final stages of their ordeal. The pieces are close to the center of the board, and each roll of the dice brings them closer to the end of the game that has controlled their lives for so long. The house has become completely transformed, no longer recognizable as the domestic space it once was. Vines cover every surface, flowers bloom in impossible profusion, and the air is thick with the sounds and smells of a tropical jungle. The boundary between the game world and the real world has almost completely dissolved. Van Pelt's presence looms over everything. He's close now, close enough that they can hear his breathing and the soft sound of his footsteps on the jungle floor. The hunter knows that the game is nearly over, and he's determined to complete his pursuit before the magical rules that govern his existence change once again. The other players can feel the tension building. Each turn of the dice requires more courage than the last, and the challenges that emerge from the game seem designed to push them beyond their limits. But they also understand that they've come too far to give up now, that they've invested too much in this journey to abandon it when victory is within reach. Sarah finds herself thinking about the girl she used to be, the curious child who was brave enough to play a mysterious game despite her fears. She realizes that all her adult achievements, all the success she's built for herself, have been attempts to recapture the courage she showed that night. Now she has a chance to finish what she started, to prove to herself that she's still that brave little girl, despite all the years that have passed. Alan looks at the faces of his companions and sees reflections of his own determination. These people have stood by him through impossible challenges, and he knows that whatever happens in the final stages of the game, he won't face it alone. The isolation and loneliness that defined his years in the jungle are over, replaced by the strength that comes from genuine friendship and shared purpose. As the game enters its final phase, Alan must confront the deepest fears that have haunted him throughout his 26 years in the jungle. The approaching end of the game seems to intensify everything. The colors are more vivid, the sounds are more immediate, and the dangers feel more personal than ever before. Van Pelt appears in the doorway of the transformed living room, his rifle raised and ready. For a moment, time seems to stop as hunter and prey face each other across the jungle vegetation that now fills the space. Alan has been running from this confrontation for decades, but now there's nowhere left to run. The house has become a closed system, and the game will not let him escape until he faces what he's been avoiding. But something has changed in Alan during his years of survival. The frightened 12-year-old boy who was pulled into the jungle has become a man who has learned to face impossible challenges with courage and determination. He's survived predators, natural disasters, and the constant threat of Van Pelt's pursuit. Most importantly, he's learned that running from fear only makes it stronger. Alan stands up slowly, his hands empty of weapons, but his eyes filled with the quiet strength of someone who has finally decided to stop running. He looks at Van Pelt not with terror, but with understanding. The hunter is not just his enemy, but a part of himself. The part that has been afraid, that has doubted his ability to survive, that has whispered that he would never be strong enough to escape. Van Pelt raises his rifle, but Alan doesn't flinch. Instead, he speaks to the hunter with the calm voice of someone who has finally understood the true nature of his situation. He acknowledges the fear that Van Pelt represents, but he also recognizes that fear is not his master. He's survived everything the jungle could throw at him, and he's not going to be defeated now when freedom is so close. The confrontation between Alan and Van Pelt becomes a symbolic battle between courage and fear, between the desire to grow and the temptation to remain trapped by past traumas. The other players watch in tense silence, understanding that this moment will determine not just Alan's fate, but the fate of everyone who has become caught up in the game's web. The final roll of the dice by Alan carries the weight of everything that has led to this moment. 26 years of waiting, months of searching, and weeks of facing impossible challenges all come down to this single throw that will determine whether the game ends in victory or continues indefinitely. The dice seem to hang in the air longer than physics should allow, tumbling slowly as if the universe itself is holding its breath. Around the players, the jungle continues its relentless growth, vines creeping closer and flowers blooming with almost audible intensity. The drums beat with a rhythm that matches their racing hearts, and the crystal dome at the center of the board pulses with light that seems to come from the very core of magic itself. When the dice finally land, they show exactly the numbers needed to reach the center of the board. The game pieces slide into their final positions with a sound like distant thunder, and for a moment, everything in the transformed house goes completely still. Even the drums stop beating, leaving a silence that feels pregnant with possibility. The game board begins to glow with an intensity that's almost blinding. The crystal dome spins faster and faster, and the miniature jungle inside it expands until it seems to fill the entire room. The boundary between the game world and the real world doesn't just blur, it disappears entirely, leaving the players standing in a space that exists between dimensions. Alan moves his piece to the very center of the board, where a single word appears in letters that seem to be made of pure light. Jumanji. As he speaks the word aloud, his voice echoes through dimensions that shouldn't exist, carrying with it the power to reshape reality itself. The transformation that follows is unlike anything any of them could have imagined. The house doesn't just return to normal. It's as if the entire sequence of events is being rewound, played backward at incredible speed. The jungle vegetation withers and disappears, the animals fade away like morning mist, and the very air begins to clear of its tropical humidity. With a sound like the world's largest door slamming shut, the game ends. The crystal dome stops spinning, The glow fades from the board, and the drums fall silent for the first time in 26 years. The transformation is so complete and so sudden that for a moment, the players can only stand and stare at each other in amazement. The house has returned to its original state, or almost. The furniture is back in its proper places, the walls are clean and straight, and the air smells of nothing more exotic than furniture polish and old wood. The game board sits on the coffee table, looking like nothing more than an antique curiosity, its surface dark and quiet. But the real miracle is what has happened to people. Alan looks around the room with wonder, touching the walls and furniture as if he can't quite believe they're real. After 26 years in the jungle, the simple reality of electric lights and clean surfaces feels like the greatest luxury imaginable. Sarah laughs with relief and joy, a sound that seems to bubble up from the deepest parts of her soul. The fears that have haunted her for decades have been faced and conquered, and she feels lighter than she has in years. The game that has defined so much of her life is finally over, and she's free to create a new story for herself. Judy and Peter hug each other tightly, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of having survived an impossible adventure. They've proven to themselves that they're braver and stronger than they ever imagined, and they've gained a new understanding of what it means to be part of a family, not just by blood, but by choice and shared experience. The lion that was prowling upstairs is gone, along with all the other animals that invaded the house. The plants that covered the walls have vanished, leaving no trace that they were ever there. Even the damage to the coffee table has been repaired, as if the game's magic extends to fixing the problems it created. But the game's magic goes far beyond simply returning the house to normal. As the players stand in the quiet living room, they begin to realize that something much more profound has happened. The very fabric of time has been altered, rewoven to create a different pattern than the one that existed before. Alan looks out the window and sees something that makes his heart race with hope and disbelief. The trees outside are smaller than they should be. The cars parked on the street are models from decades past, and the very quality of light seems different, softer, more golden, like the light he remembered from his childhood. Sarah checks her watch and gasps. The date has changed. Not just the day or the month, but the year itself. They're back in 1969, back to the night when Alan was first pulled into the jungle. But this time, things are different. This time, they know what the game can do, and they're not going to let it trap anyone else. The adult Alan and Sarah find themselves in the bodies of their 12-year-old selves, but they retain all their memories of the years that have passed. They remember the jungle, the animals, the fear, and the courage that finally set them free. They remember Judy and Peter, though the children themselves have never been born in this timeline. Their parents are still alive, still young, still years away from the skiing accident that would make them orphans. Alan runs through the house, calling for his parents, and when they appear, he throws himself into their arms with the desperate joy of someone who has been given a second chance. His father is young again, his mother is vibrant and healthy, and the family that was torn apart by tragedy has been restored. Sarah experiences her own reunion with her family, embracing parents who are decades younger than they were in the other timeline. The fears that shaped her adult life have been erased, replaced by the confidence that comes from having faced the impossible and survived. The next morning, Alan and Sarah meet at the construction site where Alan first found the game. They're children again, but they carry the wisdom and experience of adults who have been through trials that would challenge people twice their age. They understand that they've been given a gift beyond measure, the chance to live their lives again, but with the knowledge of what they've learned. They dig carefully in the spot where Alan found the Jumanji game, and they're not surprised when their search reveals the familiar wooden box. The game sits in their hands, looking innocent and harmless, but they know better. They understand the power it contains and the dangers it represents. Without hesitation, they carry the box to the bridge that spans the river on the outskirts of town. The water below is deep and fast-moving, flowing toward the ocean and destinations unknown. They look at each other once more, and then they throw the box as far as they can into the rushing water. The game disappears beneath the surface with barely a splash, carried away by currents that will take it far from Brantford and far from any children who might be tempted to play it. Alan and Sarah watch until they can no longer see even the faintest trace of the box, and then they turn away, confident that they've done what needed to be done. But they also understand that their responsibility doesn't end with disposing of the game. They've been given knowledge of the future, and they intend to use it wisely. They know about dangers that haven't happened yet, about people who will need help, about opportunities that shouldn't be missed. Over the following years, Alan and Sarah become the closest of friends, bound together by their shared experience and their mutual understanding of what they've survived. They use their knowledge to help others, preventing accidents before they happen and offering guidance to people who are struggling with problems that seem insurmountable. Years pass, and Alan and Sarah grow up again, but this time their childhood is filled with joy and adventure rather than fear and trauma. They become successful in their own right, Alan as a businessman who treats employees with unusual kindness and understanding, Sarah as a teacher who has an uncanny ability to help troubled children find their way. When they're both adults, they attend a Christmas party at Alan's house. The Parrish family has prospered, the business has grown, and the house is filled with laughter and warmth. But the most important guests at the party are a couple whom Alan and Sarah have never met in this timeline, though they remember them with great fondness. Judy and Peter's parents are alive and well, happy and successful. They've never been in a skiing accident because Alan, using his knowledge of the future, made sure they changed their vacation plans at the last minute. The family is intact, and the children are growing up with the security and love that every child deserves. Judy and Peter are teenagers now, bright and confident young people who have no memory of the traumatic events that shaped their lives in the other timeline. They don't remember the game, or the jungle, or the fear that once consumed them. But sometimes, when they look at Alan and Sarah, they feel a strange sense of recognition, as if they've met these kind adults before, in a dream they can't quite remember. Alan and Sarah watch the children with deep affection, understanding that they've not only saved their own lives, but the lives of these innocent young people. The game that once threatened to destroy them has instead become the catalyst for creating a better world, a world where families stay together and children grow up, surrounded by love and security. The Christmas party is warm and joyful, filled with the kind of happiness that comes from genuine human connection. But as the evening winds down and the guests begin to leave, Alan and Sarah step outside into the crisp December air, both of them thinking about the same thing. They walk to the bridge where they threw the Jumanji game so many years ago, the same bridge that now spans a river that flows peacefully towards the ocean. The water below is dark and quiet, reflecting the stars that shine overhead. Somewhere beneath that water, or perhaps far downstream, or perhaps washed out to sea, the game waits. Alan and Sarah understand that they haven't destroyed the game. They've simply moved it to a different place, delayed its discovery by perhaps a few decades. The game is ancient and patient, and it will wait as long as necessary for new players to find it and begin the cycle once again. But they also understand that they've done what they could with the knowledge and power they were given. They've saved their own lives and the lives of others. They've created a timeline where love triumphs over fear, and they've proven that even the darkest games can be won by people who refuse to give up. The end. If you are still awake, try our other movie story videos. Subscribe if you liked the video. Thanks.